It's time to accelerate. Hi, I'm your host, Andy Paul. Join me as I host conversations with the leading experts in sales, marketing, sales automation, sales process, leadership, management, training, coaching, any resource that I believe to help you accelerate the growth of your sales, your business, and most importantly, you. Hello, and welcome to Accelerate. I'm excited to talk with my guest today. Joining me on the show is Greg Head. He's the CEO of Greg Head Consulting, and until not too long ago, the CMO of Infusionsoft. Greg, welcome to Accelerate.
It's great to be here, Andy.
So take a minute, fill us in on your background a little bit. How'd you end up where you are today?
Well, I've been in the software business for 30 years, starting way back in the late 80s when a friend of mine said, well, you looking for a real job out of college? Come work with me at Egghead Software.
Oh, Egghead.
Yes. So I'll get right to it. I was Greg Head from Egghead back in the early days of the software business. And That was an ultimate gift to me. So I have fun with that, of course. But the gift was
now, weren't they up in Seattle?
They were based in Seattle, but it was one of the fastest growing companies in America. And it was the beginning of the packaged software business when it was just coming out of the hobbyist and into the mainstream. And of course, software is a massive industry back then, but back then it was Misfits and the early things. So it was all the new stuff every week, PageMaker and WordPerfect and all that kind of stuff. And I was selling my brains out and learning all this software, managing retail stores, and I just had a ton of fun with that. That was my
excuse me, I just remember meeting, I was up there. I met with them for some reason. I'm trying to remember which company I was with where I met with Egghead, but who was the CEO at the time? Victor Alhadeff?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right.
He was. I met with him. I forget. I said he was the CEO at the time. I forget what company that was, but very interesting.
Yeah, and there I discovered one of the first software programs for salespeople to actually use computers, which they didn't back then. They didn't know how to type and use computers. That was for somebody else. Well, ACT.
Oh, ACT, yes.
Yeah, ACT and Goldmine and a few others, but It was the early days, and salespeople weren't using it. But the first 10 people I ever sold ACT to at my retail store came back and were raving, and I helped them start using it, and I joined a little company of 10 people in Dallas and started taking that around the country and being the national rep, and I helped grow that company as the product manager, one of the first product managers in the software business. And we sold that to Symantec in 93. So I made my way through Dallas and Cupertino at Symantec. And with the founder of ACT in 1996, when sales teams were starting to use computers and imagine that would be useful, which was a new thing. I helped start a company here in Phoenix called Sales Logics, which was CRM for companies that have outgrown individual user ACT and small work ACT and couldn't afford the complexities of the high-end enterprise software.
So did you actually call it CRM at that point?
It was called Salesforce Automation way back then. And so when we started Sales Logics, it was Salesforce Automation, which is one of the terrible category names because you had to force people to use it, and nobody wanted to be automated. You couldn't tell your customers, "Hey, I got Salesforce Automation; it's good for you." But you could say, "Hey, I got customer relationship management. This is going to be a good thing." And so the 90s is when salespeople started to use computers, and email was the thing that got them really on it. But we grew Sales Logics. We went public in 99. We actually bought ACT back from Symantec, and I ran that business for another 5 years and lived through the .com and all that, and spent a few years with some other startups and helping and consulting and advising. And then I joined Clayton Mask at Infusionsoft, which is sales and marketing software, CRM and email and automation for small businesses, most like yourself and the rest that have big email lists and want to monetize and automate all of that, which a small business can't do. And so that's what Infusionsoft is. And so it's like the Salesforce.com for small businesses these days. And we grew that from scrappy, $15 million company up to $100 million. And I left last year, and I go back to the early stages. So I'm an early stage growth guy. After invention and during the whoosh of growth, if you do it right, and then it turns into more of a machine. And so I've helped two companies in Phoenix grow to $100 million. And I saw both of those founders today, Pat Sullivan, the ACT founder, and Clay Mask
Very
of
interesting.
Infusionsoft. So I like helping the crazy ones grow their businesses. And it always looks crazy before it looks obvious.
Well, that sort of leads into a topic I want to talk to you about, because you've written an article about the 7 telltale signs that you have strategic problems that will limit your growth, as you just talked about. So the first one is that I thought it would be fun to go through these. The first one is that you say that you have mediocre revenue growth despite lots of energy and attention.
Well, as you know, helping companies that are ambitious and trying to grow, it's always it's like climbing Everest. It's not easy. It's full of treacherous obstacles, and usually companies, they get onto something and they start moving and something works and that team works and there's a market opportunity and they just go great guns. 100% straightforward, we're learning and so forth, but they're in tactical execution mode, run fast.
Right.
And eventually those magic tricks don't work. Whatever tactic worked a couple of years ago doesn't work as well. Whatever team you had when you were smaller doesn't work as well. Whatever approach you had, the market's changed a little bit. So that's a sign when you pedal faster, but the things don't move, that you actually need to look deeper. And it's not just another VP of sales or pushing the email button harder. And there's a time for that where you just got to, work hard. But there's a time in the stair-stepping growth of any company that you have to strategically dig down and move things around to get through the next phase. And that's really a telltale sign of growth companies. It's not that it was a straight line to get there or random luck. Is they recognized when they were stuck, things started to slow down. They realized the things that work don't work as well anymore, and we got to start digging deeper.
Yeah, I think if you look at sort of the growth curve, I think it doesn't really look like much of a curve. You see with high growth companies, there's oftentimes sort of slower growth and there's big step function growth, and then you have sort of slower growth and big steps. So it sort of comes in bunches. Yeah. And I think part of the problem seems to be that, as I've experienced, and this is I think for listeners to, listening to this sort of realize, is to the point you made before, is as you grow, the recipe changes. And you have to be conscious of the fact that the recipe changes. And sometimes you need to, sometimes you lose that recipe and you need to go find it again.
Well, it's so unusual to be part of growth companies. I didn't really know this. I mean, I'm a kid from Chicago who fortunately started in a retail store at the beginning of the packaged software business, and literally was selling ACT, and 12 years later I was running the company. And it's not because I'm a Stanford MBA or, the smartest person. It's because I figured out what the game was. And by the way, in the growth game, it keeps changing. What you do when you're starting out and nobody's doing it and you're five people and, is very different than when you're funded and you have some more credibility and you have VPs of everything and there's more competition, is very different than when it's big and established and everybody knows it and there's three companies.
A lot of steps in between there too, right?
Yeah, I mean, no, there's literally in between the $500,000 to $1 million, we're kind of up and running phase, to 10 million where, okay, I think we got it. There's probably 5 or 6 steps in there, and dozens of landmines that all CEOs who are trying to solve big problems and grow companies have to deal with. And it's such an extreme sport. I mean, it's not impossible. It's just hard. But it's so unusual that normal people don't really know what that's like. I lived in companies that bumped their heads and figured it out and grew 100% a year for 15 years, and I didn't know the world didn't look like that.
Right.
So,
which it doesn't for most companies, right?
That's correct. And I can't do anything else right now.
But the lessons are the same for either the high growth or even the slower growth company. That's right. Even if you're making that transition, I've had clients make the transition from 10 to 15 million or 10 to 12 million, there's inflection points in there, and they have to be really conscious of the fact that, this recipe has to be different at 10 million than it is at 12 or 15.
Well, there are normal inflection points that are very recognizable for small businesses. Once you look at it, I've spent a lot of time with small businesses and startups, and that move from a sole proprietor to having employees is a huge step function and so forth. But
and you talk about that in one of the telltale signs of growth, or problems, excuse me, in the growth is you come into a small business and you find out the CEO is doing most of the selling.
Yeah, well, that's a sign that that works in the beginning. You have to do that, and some CEOs are surprised they have to do as much selling as they do to make their airplane get off the ground. But when the magician CEO who knows all the details in the industry and has all the credibility is the only one who can sell the product with confidence and at a reasonable rate, then you realize you haven't packaged it up for, the rest of the team and mere mortals to be able to sell the same product. And growth is actually a transition from being many things to many people, a lot of ADD, right? And complexity because it's inside a few people's heads.
Right.
To something that is more systematic and simpler, more OCD and disciplined.
That's interesting.
Is capable of scale. So that's most people are surprised by that. And I find most entrepreneurs who are moving their companies forward and dealing with all the normal struggles, they're like great business athletes. But nobody told them that first sport you play is like tennis. And then when you grow and have a team and maybe funding, that it's probably a lot less like tennis and it's more like football.
Right.
And you have to put down the racket and say, here's what a pass is, and here's what a run is, and a kick, and then
define the plays, right?
So there's some,
an example of a client I worked with who came in. The guy was very self-aware entrepreneur. This was like his third or fourth company, but the things that just sort of flattened out, and he wasn't really sure why. And it was to your point exactly you made about the CEO. As I got in and examined it, it wasn't like he was leading the effort on every sale, but on at least 50% of the sales that they'd had in the previous year, the deal wouldn't have closed without his participation at one level or another. And it wasn't that they needed him to do it. That was the crazy thing. It wasn't that the people needed him to do it. It was just they'd gotten into the habit of involving him. Yeah. And it wasn't that he felt the need to be in it. This is how they had done it. And so, that was our first thing that I changed, to say, look, you're no longer in sales, the CEO. And if they have a problem, they'll call you. But otherwise, they're going to finish the deals themselves. And it was pretty transformative. Even within the first year, sales started taking off again because he had become a choke point.
Right. At Infusionsoft, when I joined, we had just over 100 employees, and it looked like kind of an ADD company, selling to everybody and not saying no and add any feature if somebody wanted it, and kind of moving in all directions, which works when you're a smaller company.
Right.
And then we created more focus in the business for a certain kind of customer that has a certain kind of need, and we narrowed the product and tried to contain it. And our growth started picking up. It literally went from 0% growth 6 years ago to 40%, 50%, which means doubling every 2 years.
Right.
So what we would find as fanatic, smart, energetic, very connected leaders and the entire team is that we would figure something out. We'd get it down. Okay, we did the work, and it would start to work, and then there'd be the whooshing, the tactical payoff. And then as the company grew, more people, more customers, the level of complexity in the business grew, that about every 18 months, there would start to be frustration and raising of voices. And the thing that worked 18 months ago, didn't get the same results.
Sure.
And literally had to stop everything, or stop what we were doing there, examine it, do the hard work to let go of something and grab onto something else. And that's how companies do it. And there isn't a company that goes from 0 to 100 million and skips all those steps. Well, sometimes you move it faster, and sometimes with a little less angst, but either you're getting stopped there at any step along the way, or you're dealing with hard stuff and getting through it.
Yeah, well, I think one of the things that you just said that was really sort of interesting to me is that, and I think for people listening to this, it's really important to pay attention. Is that what I heard you say is that in a high growth company, about every 18 months, you basically have to sort of hit the reset button.
Yeah,
and that's okay. I mean, that's not a sign of weakness. That's a sign of strength. Is that you have the discipline to say, look, yeah, things have changed enough that we need to sort of, let's say, put our finger on the reset button, and we're sort of doing a little bit of a turnaround here. Because I get that question all the time is from clients. It's like, well, I don't need to do a sales turnaround because we're doing okay. I haven't hired a new VP of sales. It's like, no, you don't wait till you hire a new VP of sales to hit the reset button. Is something you should be doing yourself.
Yeah, and that's because the first rule of the game is to know what game you're playing. And the game continually moves as your company grows. And, the old saying that if you're a founder and then you get VCs, that if you grow to a certain point, then the VCs are going to replace the founder, right? That's kind of the reputation that's out there. But they don't want to do that. They want the CEO to keep growing through the phases, which means that they need to stop saying that I'm the best sales guy in the company.
Right.
And reward other best salespeople, right? They have to stop being that and give it up. And Bill Gates and Steve Jobs and Mark Zuckerberg and other founders that are doing massive things have done the same thing that we were just talking about in an organization, where you have to shed your skin and figure out what game you're playing and go master that and give up the old one. And it's a continual game. And so founders have to do that, and leaders have to do that. And the faster you grow, the higher the velocity of your role, and the faster you need to move. So most people think it's just about adding new knowledge and skills and capabilities, but you have to stop doing the things you did before.
Well, I think
in some cases,
right? And I think to sort of aligned with the point you're making, though, is for entrepreneurs and so on, is that, or not entrepreneurs, but for companies that are growing, and executives coming in or people coming in, is increasingly, and I think this is a smart thing, you hear this more and more, is people say, okay, well, I think it was CEO of LinkedIn that wrote this book, talking about tours of duty, right? So when you hire people, is sort of like in the military, you're there for 2-3 years, that may be the role that's optimum for you. That stage of a company's growth, and it's not like everybody has to grow with the company at all times.
Right. Yeah. And so the sport of growth is a different kind of game. It's kind of like playing in the pros, where, it's not like you're entitled to be the same person and act the same way 5 years later. The company transformed, and you either decide you want to keep going and play that game, or do something else. And for founders, they can replace leaders like Pony Express. That'll get me from this stop to that stop. And a little bit of that knowledge and transformation, stepwise change, comes from leaders who've been to the next level, and they just bring that in. But they actually have to Pony Express themselves as they get through it. Otherwise, they don't get to play. So that is one of the major reasons that companies get stuck. It's not that they can't figure out how to set up CRM and ship their product and email correctly. It's because something deeper and less visible is keeping them at that stepwise function. Well, and that's the natural state of things, because most companies don't grow up to be LinkedIn or Microsoft or Infusionsoft.
Well, and one of the cardinal sins you talk about is hopefully I can say this without having an explicit rating on my podcast, is companies sort of making crap up. We'll change it from
stuff up.
Making stuff up every day. So just sort of freewheeling it. And there is a time when you need to have a plan. I worked at Apple in sort of some of the early days of Apple, and it was a fairly good sized corporation at that time, and there were no business plans, at the department level. I mean, money was coming in. Any budget I wanted, I got for what I was doing at the time, which was, it was crazy how much money I was getting. And they changed that eventually, but a lot of companies still operate that way.
Well, and to be honest, that sport makes sense when you're early and playing with a market and seeing what sticks and trying things and aligning. But the more people you add to the system, the more the customer expectations go up. Mm-hmm. When Facebook first started, we didn't really care if the feature didn't work or whatever. But now, if the image doesn't happen in a second, we're frustrated.
Right.
Things change in the maturing process. So that's why I talk about ADD to OCD, right?
Yeah, I like that.
Most entrepreneurs think the game of starting is what the game is like when you grow a big company. So it's kind of like the chef that says, well, I'm a really great cook. I love to cook. I can cook any kind of food, and I love to do different things. And isn't that fun? Well, that's completely different than what a chef does when they make a restaurant. Because at a restaurant, you make one kind of thing for one kind of customer in one place every day. And the more obsessive you are about making it consistently and great, high quality that other people can do, the better your restaurant is. Right. And that's actually, Steve Jobs tried to deny that, and then he came back and he said, oh, no, where it's all about the discipline, right? And the focus. So, there's a time to go find your focus and then to be focused and be that. What the world hears on the outside for a scalable company is a company that, went from trying things and being very focused. Jeff Bezos, when he started Amazon, knew that he could sell anything that could fit in a box.
Right.
As e-commerce. He had a vision, but he chose just books. And so he, of course, because books weren't perishable, and if you had one warehouse, you could send it around, and smart people who would put credit cards in a browser, that was a pretty good thing to sell to them. Right. And there was already a database and so forth. But the discipline to say no to everything else is what defined Amazon. And you of course, remember the second player to Amazon back then in the online books. No, we don't.
Yeah, who was it, by the way?
I don't know.
Oh.
They were so dominant that they added DVDs and CDs. 3 years later, they were public and smoked every buddy out, changed the entire industry, and they slowly added one more thing. And so entrepreneurs and growth companies, they see the big companies, McDonald's, it's everything. It's not just hamburgers, it's salads and coffee and breakfast and all that thing. And they see Amazon selling everything to everybody. But in the very beginning of any company that grows up, show me a big company and I'll show you their growth spurt when they were laser focused. And they said, no, we are just this. Just coffee was, high quality coffee in a retail was Starbucks.
Right.
And nobody starts being many, many things to many people. Big companies usually end up like that. But nobody sees how that was made. And by the way, when big companies look back and they say, oh, yeah, we've always been everything to everybody. They kind of, forget about the stair-stepping and, the laser focus that they had. Yeah.
Right. And to your point, it's really important for companies to be able to say no more than they say yes. So, I wanted to, in the time we had left, I wanted to talk a little bit about the, some interesting thoughts about how to rethink your strategies, and you had some questions people should pose to themselves, which I thought were really interesting. So, and I think whether you're an entrepreneur, I think even if you're an individual salesperson, these are some really interesting questions to ask yourself. And one was that I liked is, going forward, if we're making a plan, what would we do if we could not fail?
Yeah.
Interesting perspective to have to do planning. If we couldn't fail, what would we do?
Right. And planning and that time to get out of tactical execution mode, which is where life happens and progress happens, but occasionally you have to step back and look at it really deeply. And there's some simple ways to do that, just kind of assess where we've been and what needs to happen next. But it's always useful to pull your mind, stretch it like taffy, and try to break some of the focus, the blinders that we put ourselves on when we're growing companies. And that's a great one. What would we do if we could not fail? What would you do if you had no fear?
Right.
Creates opportunities. And the fun thing, I know you advise a lot of companies. We get to come as outsiders, get right to the core questions and start wrestling that thing around and ask questions they wouldn't normally ask themselves. But what I find, I was just doing this yesterday with a very fast-growing company here in Phoenix. They went from, in their first year of business, did $100 million in business.
Whoa.
And they're in the real estate business. It's going to be one of the biggest things.
Wow.
But even as big as they're thinking, and they're thinking massively, in one corner of it, I said, now just let go of all imagination. If somebody could endorse you to tell your story and move everybody along faster, it's a newfangled way to do the housing game, to sell your house. Who would you imagine would be the best one? We played with that for a while, and then we threw the ball way out there.
Warren Buffett.
And said, no, actually, right. He was one of them that came up because he said, last time when the housing market went south, he said, if I had the right vehicle for that, I would buy houses, all day long. And the housing market changed when he said that. So they thought of other things, and they realized there's people in the room who knew that person, and we'll start making calls tomorrow. So sometimes entrepreneurs think so far ahead they can't deal with today, and sometimes there's so much in today they can't move these things around. And this is really the game that most people don't play. The reality is this is a made-up game, right? And we're making things up ourselves. We're creating products. We're creating companies. We're creating categories. We're creating sales comp plans. The world that we exist in was created by people who, ventured out and made things up. So,
and also
then
luck
they become true.
Luck plays a big role in it as well. So, if you're open to succeeding, and you said, what could you do if it couldn't fail? Yeah, luck may help you along the way.
Yes. And there's a lot of big problems in the world. I mean, all that's left is the big challenges. The easy stuff is we don't worry about anymore, right? The big stuff is the stuff that needs addressing. And we need more entrepreneurs and companies and people to aim high to solve some big problems and go after it like they couldn't fail. And just like Steve Jobs always said, it's the crazy ones who, if those that think they can actually change the world are the ones that usually do. Right. And, that's just the fun of all this game.
Yeah. Well,
mere mortals can do magical things.
Right. Who was it said? If you think you can or you think you can't, you're right either way, right?
That's exactly right.
Right. So, Greg, we're actually in the last segment of the show where I've got some standard questions I ask all my guests. And so the first one is one that, I've posed to well over 400 people right now is if you were just hired as VP of sales by a company whose sales have sort of stalled out, sort of like we just talked about, growth got stuck, CEO, the board are anxious for things to happen quickly. What 2 things would you do your first week on the job that could have the biggest impact?
Well, my simple method through all these years is to jump in and see as quickly as I can what the current state of things are. And I don't take it at face value. I keep digging till because I know it's all made up. I'm just going to keep digging around and see deeper than the sales team and the comp plans and product. And I'm going to, get through that pretty quickly.
Right.
And then I'm going to go straight out and come through it the other side and say, how does the world see us and how do our customers and our prospects see us? And jump right out of the building the other way.
Right.
And so that's the part of the magic trick I have. It's not magic, but if I know it's all made up and somebody hands me a comp plan and says this is the way it is, I say, I appreciate that. Somebody made that up. And I imagine we can move things around. And you go on the other side and you talk to customers and partners, there's things in their head and beliefs and so forth. And, that's true and that can be moved too. So it's assessing all of that from the inside and the outside.
Well, really, it sounds like, sort of as you're talking about, is really understanding people's perceptions of what the problem is.
Yeah.
And the thing with perceptions, the thing with perceptions is, perceptions are emotional looks at things. So you look for consistency, I think. I would say, I'm not putting words in your mouth, but at least when I do that, I do the same thing. I don't take anything at face value. And at some level, you start seeing some connections and consistency.
Right.
In the story.
And that's part of the gift that I can give as an outsider with a lot of different perspectives. I'm not in the firefight. I mean, that's the first challenge, is that VPs of sales and CEOs who have boards and salespeople who have quotas, it's like they're in the firefight. It's very stressful. They got the blinders on. That's what happens when our stress goes up, and everybody's very focused. And, for a moment, I could say, I'm not in the firefight completely yet, and I'm going to go look around here and create some possibilities. Eventually, you lose that perspective, and then you need to get help yourself.
Yeah, you can't see the forest or the trees.
That's right.
Okay, so some rapid-fire questions for you. You can give me one-word answers or elaborate if you wish. So the first one is, when you, Greg, are out selling your services, what's your most powerful sales attribute?
Well, since I'm part entrepreneur and part marketer, I love helping growth companies deal with the non-obvious strategic structural challenges for growth, and CEOs know they have them. So I've been through that game for 30 years. And when I talk to CEOs, we can put our finger on it pretty quickly. And that's a magic trick that enables their revenues to grow, the valuation of their company to grow, and the longevity to grow. So I look for the $1 million problems, and they're all over the place. So
credibility is your attribute.
Okay. I'll take credibility.
Sure. So who's your business role model?
Well, 2 years ago, I'll say Jim Collins.
Okay.
Jim Collins is a master of, from an outside, for much bigger companies, to come in and put his finger on very intrinsic problems, to reveal it in a narrative that's useful to everybody, and to create a model for getting through the growth phases.
Okay.
We did some work with him, and he really has the magic trick.
Okay. One book you'd recommend every entrepreneur should read?
I'll say Crossing the Chasm, which is a classic.
Okay. Jeffrey Moore, right?
Jeff Moore, yeah.
All right.
Especially for companies, more and more these days in the growth game, they're trying to do new things that isn't familiar to the world anymore yet, and there's a way to get through that. That hasn't changed in all these years.
Okay. Yeah, it's a good book if people haven't read it. So, last question for you: what music is on your playlist these days?
I play acoustic guitar, so I listen to a lot of singer-songwriter. So I'll say Ryan Adams is. Oh, Ryan Adams, okay. It's right up.
Very good. Are you in a band?
Occasionally.
Occasionally. Okay. So you do gigs?
Yeah. Well, jams. How about that?
Jams. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Free. No one's paying.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, good. Well, Greg, thanks for joining me today. So tell people they can find out more about you and connect with you.
Well, they can go to my website where some of the topics we talked about are on my blog. Sign up for my newsletter at greghead.com, GREGHEAD.com, and they can connect with me on LinkedIn if they want to have a chat about some of their growth challenges.
Okay, excellent. Well, again, thank you for joining me. And remember, friends, thank you for joining me. And remember to make sure that you deliberately learn something new every day to help you accelerate your success. An easy way to do that is join my conversations with top business experts like my guest today, Greg Head, who shared his expertise about how to accelerate the growth of your business. And if you enjoy Accelerate and the value we're delivering, then please also take a quick minute right now to go to iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to the podcast and leave your feedback. It'd be very much appreciated. So thanks again for joining me. Until next time, this is Andy Paul. Good selling, everyone. Thanks for listening to the show. If you like what you heard and want to make sure you don't miss any upcoming episodes, please subscribe to this podcast on iTunes or Stitcher.com. For more information about today's guest, visit my website at andypaul.com.